Thanks very much to our four speakers. We're going to take some questions now from the floor. I don't think we need a roving mic, do we, Maeve?
No, I don't think we have them anyway.
Yeah, so
speak up.
I think we can all hear each other. Hopefully we can anyway. So just if you feel like identifying yourself, re-ask your question. Just take some.
Hi, my name is Brendan Holland. I'm the chairman of my sins. I'm the chairman of the Glue Committee, and I've been working on it with the help of a number of people here tonight and a number of people who have been with it. One of the reasons I got involved in it was because I saw the calibre of people who were involved in it. And I have to say these were people who had vision, and I rank Dr. Chris Coughlin high among them and pay tribute to him tonight for all the work he did. But having said that, we're 10 years working on the Glue Committee, and our whole idea is to get sustainable, high-proven traffic and road. We fully understand that this city cannot take any more cars. In a ranking of 1,000 cities around the world, Galway ranks 61 or 61st worst congested city in the world. That means that we are really shooting ourselves in the foot. So we need a really major solution to a really major problem. And I think talking to the speakers here tonight, we're really all talking on the same wavelength, except maybe just slightly different. You might think I have a conflict here with Bus Éireann, but I don't, because our routes are almost exactly the same as the BRT that Brian is proposing here. I'm just asking Brian to step up a little bit more. We don't mind if Bus Éireann want to run it. We don't mind. With the city we went out in Paris, in France, to see it, Angers, they were actually run by the tram company. The bus company ran the tram as well as the bus, and they ran in conjunction. And what happened was the tram went, let's say, south north, and the buses went east-west until they bring in their second, because it is so successful. When we asked the man in Angers, did they have a housing problem, he didn't know what we were talking about. And then we asked him, did he have a traffic problem? Well, he laughed at us to think that they had a traffic problem in Angers. The tram, you only have to go to Dublin, stand at Houston Station and what's happening there, and anybody and everybody will get on a tram and they know where they go. Brian spoke about reliability and being there on time and all the rest of it. And I don't doubt you, Brian, that you're trying hard to get the bus to do it. And fair play to you, we can follow that and put our tram down on your routes eventually. But I ask you, why wait? The Luas is not as expensive as you think it is. We get hit every time with the heavy duty, big ship that the Luas in Dublin is. We are looking for a light rail system, which has light tracks, which doesn't require all the deep penetration and all the rest of it. They're spending somewhere, it varies an awful lot, but it was mentioned here, I think it was you, Lorna, that mentioned it, that they're spending a billion euro on transport in Galway. And somewhere, or the ring road is going to cost somewhere between 600 and 650 million, somewhere. That means there's 350 million for a bus and transport system around Galway. You get 2 light rail systems for that nearly. So I plead, just raise the bar a little higher for Galway. I have firm belief that light rail system is a part of the solution. Thank you.
Do you want to respond to that, please?
Sure. Okay, thanks, Brendan. First of all, I don't think Bus Éireann will have a say in who runs a light rail system in Galway. That would be down to the NTA. We operate all our services under contract to the NTA, and therefore, it won't be our call as to whether we do it or not. I suppose, secondly, the point I would make about BRT is that it's part of an incremental process building up to light rail. And, I mentioned that in terms of the costs, it's very impressive versus the tram. You're talking about infrastructure costs that are 10% of what a light rail system would be. But I suppose most importantly is the infrastructure operating costs are only 0.5%. And as I say, it's a process we have, for example, a very successful route on 409. It's a question then of building that up to being what we call BRT light, which is effectively you're still using very good double-deck buses, very good ticketing systems and integrated ticketing. Leap card, as we know, is growing exponentially in terms of usage here in Galway. You give the priority measures, so you're guaranteeing every journey time. These only involve, painting lines on roads effectively, and offering rights of way to public transport buses, building up the street infrastructure, as I mentioned earlier, that every bus stop becomes a mini station with your ticketing, your information, your real-time information, and shelter, etc. And at that stage, you can look at moving to proper BRT, which is effectively a Lewis on tyres, as I mentioned earlier. It looks like a Lewis, sliding doors, quick load on, quick load off, similar ticketing systems, the whole works. And then you're at a stage where you've proven the concept, you've reached a critical mass that warrants the implementation of a light rail system. And the route is set down, the priority is all given, and you can effectively lay the tracks at that stage. That's kind of the mode of thinking. But I mean, to a certain extent, it's my own thinking. I'm not going to advocate that as Bus Éireann's policy or not, because as I said earlier, it won't be down to Bus Éireann who operates a light rail system in Galway. That will be much higher up the chain in terms of the National Transport Authority or the Department of Transport.
Brian, sorry, I'm not going to be driving a tram either, so I don't mind the drive. All we want to do is get it. But the word increment kind of worries me. For 30 years ago, I was at the city council, and they were talking about bus lanes and this and that and the other, and you can do a bit here, do a bit there. And that's the bit that sort of worries me, is there must, as Deputy Connolly said there must be 10 reports done in the meantime. And really, we're getting worse and worse and worse. And the only few bright lights are your bus lanes. Where if you start a light rail, you have to finish it. You can't just leave the track halfway up the road and halfway back and halfway here. So in a relatively short time, there is a light rail. There can be a light rail.
Can I just respond to that just briefly? It just kind of goes back to what Catherine was saying earlier about, it's like saying then it's light rail or nothing, and you end up with nothing. So what I'm saying is at least out of an incremental process, you're getting some benefits along the line in a relatively short space of time, albeit with a bus transport system. If you decide, well, we're not going to put in any of that priority or any of those improvements unless it's light rail, well, then you just end up with the status quo.
Hi there, sorry, my name's Connolly. I'm an architect. I'm also a member of the Groups Group. So, my question on that is that I understand and appreciate what you're saying about building it up incrementally. Are there examples that you could give us of other European cities of approximately a similar size that have introduced the BRT recently, and how successful that has been? Have they introduced it completely solely on its own, or have they introduced it as a stepping stone to introducing something else? For example, of some of the cities that we've been to recently or that we've looked at, such as, let's say Galway is 80,000 at the moment. We expect to have a population of 120,000 plus in the near future. We've looked at cities like Odense, Denmark's third largest city at 180,000, tramline. Le Mans and Angers in France, 140,000, both have tramlines. Cosenza, Italy, currently planned population of about 80,000. Valenciennes, also France, population of only 60,000 with a large hinterland that they'll keep extending. So in all of these cities, they haven't done an incremental thing. They've just gone straight for the tram as part of the public transport, and they haven't built up. So my question is, are there examples of where BRT has been introduced, similar of comparisons that you could give us, and then why would you build it up rather than plan for it?
Okay, well, again, you're talking to me like I'm the policymaker in relation to this, As I say, a lot of the opinions I'm expressing here are my own, and Bus Éireann have, investigated the possibility of BRT for, as I say, for the past 10 years, because it's a bus-based system, so to speak, and that's what we're about. I suppose cities that have BRT are the likes of Eindhoven, Saint-Nazaire, York, Leeds, Edinburgh, I believe, have it as well, and there are bigger cities then in Canada such as Ottawa and Toronto. So they and some of them, the ones in Eindhoven, as I say, they, to all intents and purposes, they look like a Lewis. But as I said earlier, you know, from Bus Éireann's point of view, we're operating the bus system at the moment. BRT Light, so to speak, is still effectively a bus system, so we would hope to be involved in that. BRT, if it got to that stage, you're still talking about a driver behind a wheel, albeit that it looks like a tram. We had some of them here 10 years ago, just for demonstration, etc. We tried them out on all of our city routes to ensure that there wouldn't be any problems in terms of manoeuvrability, etc., and we had no problem. So in that, it's very flexible in that sense, you know, that it's not just a set route. That it can be implemented effectively on any of the routes we have at the moment. But when it comes then to the next step up to actual light rail, etc., as I say, that is not going to be Bus Éireann who make the call on that. Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I suppose, support Brendan and Colin what they're saying. I think that I just would be very, very fearful of an approach where we get a small bit now and a small bit then. That has happened, from what I can see, that's happened here in the past, and we've been left behind. We were years behind developments in Dublin in relation to transport, in relation to Cork, in relation to Limerick, and this could be repeating again. So we do need to take that big step and get these major infrastructure pieces in place, otherwise we will continue to struggle. And major infrastructure, as I said already, an outer ring road and light rail, I think, will be a key part to that solution. So that they all have to be brought together, but we have to just make that step, and we have to look for the best.
Derek Hamilton and Ashra. I have to say that I spent 30 years driving a taxi around Galway since 1984, and having just retired only 4 years ago, a lot of experience about traffic and transport in Galway, some of it negative because of being caught up in the jams. There is no doubt that this city, if it doesn't make progress with regard to policy on transport, it is going to fall. It's already falling behind. I watch what's going on in Cork. I was married in Limerick. My wife is Limerick. I watch what happens in Limerick. The amount of money that's being invested in Limerick at the moment for development is astronomical. I mean, you know, but they have a plan. They have a plan. We have a city development plan, which is a 6-year plan. We don't have a vision. And this city needs a vision to which everybody that has an interest may be allowed to contribute to. Not just city council or councillors or city officials or even TII. The government, Catherine has referred to the 2040 plan. It reads very well. The city development plan reads very well, but the adherence to it is disastrous. I have a couple of documents here in front of me that I've given earlier to different people regarding the development that's planned for the inner city, i.e. the docks, CIE Camp Station. We've now got this developer that's assembled a property portfolio on east of Eyre Square. The shape of Galway city centre, if these 3 developments come to pass, is going to be so different when the developments actually happen that Galway will be unrecognisable if they happen. The problem is that they're all kind of ad hoc, you know, they come in at different levels, different times and all the rest of it. I'm a great supporter of Bus Éireann. I have a pensioner's pass now, so I can get on the bus and I'm into town. I don't have to worry about car parking. Always when I was driving a taxi, they're our greatest friends because of the inefficiency of Bus Éireann, that people would choose to use a taxi instead. That's changed. There has been improvements, and certain routes have become very good and well used and profitable. Shane talked about car parking. There's a car parking industry in Galway. There are private car park operators. The biggest earner of car parking revenue apart from the City Council is Galway's Harbour Company. 950,000 last year in car parking fees, and they now have more land that's empty, and they could increase that even further while that land remains empty, putting more cars on it. So the attraction of bringing cars into the city is there. It's like a magnet, chicken and egg, whatever you want to call it. Unless there's a policy developed which can contribute a vision for the future of this city that centres on the provision of proper public transport, whether it's privately operated, those are all things that will happen. I'm a supporter of light rail. I've been since 1999 when Catherine ran for the council. We both ran together. I didn't get elected, she did. She's where she is now, I'm where I am now. But she's always believed that things could be done differently and better. Colin has talked about the European thing. I'm an advocate of reading what goes on. And if you look at what they're doing in Amsterdam with all their brownfield areas, the city is expanding and changing. And it's all about the provision of infrastructure and the provision made for people. It's all about people. And if we don't house people in the city, as the chair of Ambol Planola is saying in the Irish Times there, Lorna, and in the Independent as well, I might have to say, Paul Melia wrote a piece about it in January. The chair of Ambol Planola is saying unless we change our planning and invest more in our cities and towns, regional towns as well, unless we put things where people can get to them easily, you're going to continue with this old Antashka thing about one-off housing. And we're hit over the head with it all the time. We're against people living in the countryside. That's rubbish. We're for people living in villages and towns, and if people have to live in rural areas because they farm there or they nurse there or they're a solicitor there or whatever, so be it. But this selling off of sites in the countryside to urban dwellers and forcing young people who can't afford to live in Galway, my own family, have had to go out to Headford to buy a house that they could afford because they couldn't afford to buy a house in their range in Galway. So it's a whole planning issue and a vision issue. We don't have a vision, we don't have a city architect. We lost her to Limerick, who are profiting by her employment there. We don't look at what's happening elsewhere. We keep looking inwards, we keep running over our own problems again. So I welcome this debate. I think it's great, and there should be more public involvement as well, which doesn't happen, I'm afraid.
We do have local elections next year, so.
No, I'm not going again.
Anybody else? Yes? Yeah.
I'm a PhD student at university here. Just observation. 5 car lanes in either direction across the river, but just to fill that out, there's 0 bus lanes and there's only 1 bike lane in either direction. So I think that should be mentioned. That's all I'm saying.
That's one bike line across the river, is that right?
Quincentennial Bridge, there's 2 bike lanes in either direction, but if you go from west to east, you're into a really nasty place on the bus. You don't want to cycle there. And I'm someone who cycles to Rahoon, sorry. I'm someone who cycles to Rahoon, or from Rahoon to Ballybrit. You do not want to cycle across the Quincentennial Bridge on those cycle lanes, because where you get dumped at the end, at either end, is a nasty place to be. At one end you're into an obscene roundabout to push anywhere near a university. Okay, it's a ridiculous junction. It was a ridiculous junction when it was built, and it is still a ridiculous junction, and it is a shame on this city that that roundabout is still there behind the university and behind the hospital. And then at the other end, you're directed across a slip road with traffic trying to turn up the Headford Road. And again, that's a junction design that has no business in the university city or in the centre of a university city. So, and this is back to the point, which is, if you try to put in cycling facilities onto a roads network that is being optimized for cars, it's not going to work. You can't do it. You have to make a decision that cars must be managed for the benefit of other forms of transport. Full stop. That's it. And the cycle lanes, I would say, are very poorly used compared in terms of the quantity of people using them compared to the demands to actually get across the river by people on bicycles.
Yeah. I just want to follow up there, Shane, on what you're saying.
Yeah.
You just gave a really good example of how poor the cycling infrastructure is in the city. And we could sit here all night listing out examples of how bad the cycling infrastructure is. You know, the Duishka Road is one good example of like really, really bad cycle lanes. But I actually just want to ask Padraic, I want to ask you personally, like, why do you think this has been allowed to happen? Like, how come Galway is just landed with really, really poor cycling infrastructure, and that roads engineers have created these disastrous infrastructure for cyclists? Like, what do you think is the reason behind it yourself?
I think that there's a lack of roads, of any type of road, as I already said, going across the city. I think that, and I also go back to the issue of lack of investment in any form of infrastructure, road infrastructure development in the city. It has not gone in to building roads either. I mean, it's not as if the city has been building roads non-stop over the last 20 years. I'm in Galway now almost 20 years, and I think there'll be maybe about 500 metres of new road that I can even think of has been built in that time period. So it's not necessarily that cars have been getting extra roads. Ultimately, it's a space issue. Galway's, lots of the streets are too narrow, and the long-term vision and planning was not there. If you take that, you mentioned, let's say, the going over the Quincentennial Bridge. When that was built back in, as we know, over 30 years ago, space should have been left at either side for appropriate additional expansion and better development of cycle lanes. That didn't happen. People were allowed build right up next to that road. So that has totally limited any opportunity to do a better job with that road. And that could have, again, if that had been done properly, if the space had been left there, and then we'd have been better off. That did happen in Cork, where the space was left, and they were able to expand and get around that problem. So I think it's down to, it's not, I will stand up for the transportation engineers again. Very often they're dealing with a certain amount of money that's been given to do X or do Y. Okay, it's an integrated planning process that we are missing out on. And we have missed out on this vision, as Derek I think said, for the city, right across all infrastructure. And until we get that right, and I will say, if we don't get much leadership from City Council, okay, that is a problem in this city, okay, and that is having a big negative impact on where we are today.
Can I come in on that? Because I want to come in on this. I want to come in on this. I'm not sure what that means in lack of leadership. Is that lack of leadership for management or councillors? Just let me deal with this now. We built a Seamus Cork Road. Engineers built it, right? It went way over budget. I don't know whose fault that was. It certainly wasn't the councillors. We did our best to hold the system to account. I can't remember the prices. It was something astronomical. We were told by engineers that 4 roundabouts within 1.5 kilometres was the way forward. 4 kilometres within a 1.5 kilometres. We were told to fly over in the sky by engineers was the way forward. And we sat at an oral hearing and we begged from our non-engineering background, don't put a flyover in the sky, don't divide up a community, and please, Jesus, don't put in 4 roundabouts. And we sat there for 2 days, and went to Board Planola, and we were demonised, and we were successful. And what are we doing now, years later? Taking out all of the other roundabouts that were designed by engineers. Now, I'm pushing this for a debate, but when I hear about lack of leadership, where was the town in Gown? Where was the leadership from the university to work in tandem with us? Yeah. Where was the vision to say this is the way forward? And when we look at Ayr Square, I didn't want Ayr Square, 30 million. An architect told us, and engineers, that that was the way forward. Look at the town that was done by engineers or architects. It's falling down. Somewhere gave the wrong measurements, and so we've a town that's sinking, that the taxpayer is paying up. And the only headlines we get is, we're a litigious country. Well, we're not a litigious country. People that fall and get their backs destroyed are entitled to sue. The problem was the wrong specifications were given in relation to the town. And let's look at cycling facilities. We bring in a rent-to-buy scheme, sponsored by Coca-Cola and 3 companies. They've ended up in the High Court. Private companies arguing with each other. What did we do for those? We picked up all the spaces for the bicycles. When the market comes, we throw the bicycle rack up on top of the trees, such is our lack of respect for bikes. I could go on. But listen, certainly councillors are certainly not up to the mark on occasions, including myself, certainly management. But there's a civic society that has refused to get engaged, and or they say this is the only way forward. And here we are again tonight, we need an outer bypass. We've had that mantra since 1999 and nothing has been done. It ended up in Europe, this one is going to end up in Europe. And what are we going to do in the meantime? And I would have loved if the engineers for the N6 got a different type of brief. I wish those engineers, because they were lovely people, I met them, I wish they got a brief. Look, go out there and look at how to solve the problem in the next 2 years to a certain point without a bypass. Just because we need immediate solutions. Give us the immediate solutions.
Shane, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, just because it's an important point, because the Seamus Quirk Road itself between the roundabouts now seems to be working vaguely okay for people on bikes if you ignore the broken glass. Okay, although there's problems. The central issue is that the design of the Seamus Quirk Road was forced on the City Council against their will. As Catherine says, they wanted to have 4 roundabouts between the back of the university and Fort Lorenzo, and the stated vision for the City Council in 2002?
I forgot.
2002, at a Board Plenála hearing, was that cyclists would dismount and become pedestrians at every single junction. In the 21st century in Ireland, that was the consultant engineer's vision for the cycling facilities on a major route serving the university, was that cyclists would get off and walk at every junction, and they were quite happy to go before Board Plenála and state that to the inspector. Okay? And that is the vision you are dealing with. And I don't recall any protests at the time, with all due respect, from the Civil Engineering Department of NUIG Galway. Okay? They looked the other way.
Do engineers cycle?
Do engineers cycle? Well, as it happens, I just had a paper with me, and it's Owen Clifford, one of the leading cyclists in Ireland, who wrote a paper with me on transportation. Because, I mean, I could start trying to defend where we are. I mean, I've been involved in a lot of initiatives over the last 5 or 6 years with Chamber of Commerce, with City Council, etc., on traffic and transportation related issues, and down and down. Certainly, we have tried to push a lot of things here. I suppose if I look at, well, what do we need to do? I mean, some of the figures we have from university is when the Seamus Quirk Road work was developed, and we did a few other things in the university at the same time, we ended up with doubling the number of staff that actually cycled to work from 7% to 15%. So I fully agree, and I want to see more of that. If we can do more things to make it easier to cycle and make it harder to drive. I mean, at the same time, we would have made it harder to park in the university, and that all helped to increase the number of people who are cycling to work. So I would always be supportive of initiatives like that. But I do firmly believe we need a better vision for the city. If we had it, I know it would work. Okay.
I could ask 2 questions. One is, well, my colleague Frank MacDonald, a former environment editor of the Irish Times, always said, you build a road, you fill it with cars. You build another road, it fills with cars. You expand the road, it fills with cars. Mm-hmm. So, you know, is a bypass the answer to that? And the other is it really the NTA is going to make these decisions? You know, maybe Brian, you can, because you're sort of saying, well, Éireann won't be able to, you know, is the NTA is going to impose decisions on Galway City Council, which will then, you know, go ahead with this?
Well, I wouldn't like to speak on behalf of the NTA, but they won't. The NTA, the National Transport Authority, they are effectively responsible for public transport. So the road side of things doesn't come into it with the NTA. They would, I presume, coordinate with TII in that in relation to, and city councils and local councils, etc., in relation to any changes made to priority measures and bits and pieces like that. But in terms of general traffic, no, it wouldn't be the NTA.
So the city council will be the lead.
In conjunction, I suppose, with TII and other bodies like that, the National Roads Authority.
Just on that, the decision is made, that's the vision, whether we like it or not. That plan that I referred to, and that refers the outer bypass, or the N6 project, it's all set out in the 2016 plan. So if you don't like the vision, that's what's there.
And that is just the vision for a certain element of transport within the region. A little bit, but I think
it covers Ordenmore, Barna, Michael and Clare Galway. It covers the whole thing for the N6 project, and it sets out the vision for the city. I'm not agreeing with it. I'm simply saying it's there. So that's what you should be taking and looking at.
and I have looked at that. I think the issue of filling roads with cars, it might happen in some places, let's say the M50 in Dublin. I don't see it in any way filling up quickly here, but I do think it's an opportunity. The opportunity is that when you put in a better road around the city, then you can attack those 5 lanes that we have, and we can do a lot more creative stuff with them. We can get the cars off some of those. I think that this work has been done by Arabs, who are some of the engineers I respect more than any others in the country. They do a super job, and they will have bus-only routes, I think, on at least one of the bridges. That's the type of thinking that we need to be bringing in, and we can implement it. But we can't implement it right now because we're just so tight for space in going from A to B. And if we can do it, this is the opportunity, I believe, that this city has to grasp very quickly. So we will have it in place by 2023 or something like that.
Just 2 more questions and then sorry, Dave.
Yeah, I suppose I just want to say that a big focus I wanted for this event was to be focused on the future rather than the past and plans that have gone before, even though of course we do need to learn from them. Going back to my own days in college in NUIG, I would have been a big bus user, and it was often, I would say, a nightmare. You'd dread the novena because you just wouldn't be able to walk. You'd be walking home a lot quicker than you could get the bus. And I'd have to commend both Éireann and say that I think the service has improved a lot in recent years. I spent almost 10 years living in London and in Brisbane, Australia, and would have been a big public transport user. I didn't have a car actually, more or less, until I moved back to Galway. So I'm just wondering, I suppose having lived in Brisbane, there's a lot of high priority bus corridors there. And while they do have, I suppose, trains, they don't have a light rail, and that'd be a city of over 1 million. Is that something that you think we could maybe do here, just to stick with the priority bus routes? That's kind of directed at everyone, but probably yourself, Brian.
Sure. Well, obviously, I'm going to promote further bus expansion, etc. As I mentioned earlier, 10% of the bus network in Galway City has bus priorities, bus lanes. And again, the corollary of that is that 90% doesn't. We're in the same traffic, whether it's novenas, whether it's a match out in Pearse Stadium, whether it's peak hour work traffic up around Parkmore. We're sharing the same road space as every other vehicle. And until such time as priority is given over to public transport, it's getting increasingly difficult for us to meet the targets that are set for us by the NTA under public service contract in terms of punctuality, reliability and service delivery. So obviously I'm going to advocate further bus priority. We have worked, as I say, with Galway City Council to get small wins here and there, but there needs to be much more of an expansion. The bus lane on the Dublin Road inbound, I think, opened in 2007, I think, 2006, 2007, just shortly after I came here. You had the bus lane, the small bit of bus lane that's outbound there in front of the G Hotel. Came a couple of years later. they've had such a positive impact on services using the Dublin Road that it's easy to see what would happen if we had more priority throughout the city. But unfortunately, the only other place we've had it is on Seamus Quirk Road when the new road was put in there.
Just the one other bit on that as well, the buses is just timing. I just always find it go, the bus stops quite early. Was there any, have you looked at all at extending it a bit later, maybe just to midnight or past midnight?
Sure, well, we do run up close to midnight at the moment. There are plans for further expansion of city service, building on the success. And I just want to be positive about bus transport in Galway over the last 5 years. 60% is a massive increase in passengers in 5 years. And building on that, the NTA look at Galway as a success story, so therefore they're willing to fund further development of our bus services. The 409 will go to a 10-minute frequency. The 404, which runs from Newcastle through the city and out to Ormore, will double in frequency as well. It's currently hourly, it'll go half hourly. Other routes will see improvements up to 15-minute frequency. And also part of that plan included increased evening services and Sunday services also. So again, you're going to see further expansion in that regard, building on the success of what we've seen already. But I suppose the fundamental issue, I'll keep harping back to it, is when we only have 10% of our network with priority, you know, we're with the way that congestion is worsening, it's making it very, very difficult.
Yeah, my name is Colin Becker. I live in Salt Hill. I'm an engineer from a long time back, but I think we're missing a trick here, and I'm really quite disappointed that none of the panel have thought of this or mentioned it, and that is the impact of new computer automation technology that could have on the whole thing. My son has a 7-year-old daughter. He's the engineering manager with a very large computer multinational, kind of a household name. He believes his daughter will never learn to drive because he thinks that within 10 years, all cars will be autonomous. Now, even if he's wrong by 5 or 10 years, and I just don't know, but even if he is, that says that building roads or even building Lewis systems or building car parks or anything like that might be the wrong answer. For instance, if all the vehicles are autonomous, we don't need to own a vehicle each. Like one vehicle will be shared by many. So we don't need car parks in the city centre because once the vehicle drops you off in the town, it goes off and hides somewhere out in the country. It doesn't need to be in the town. Even the buses themselves could be autonomous, and the interaction between all the vehicles can be electronically managed. So I'm sort of disappointed that in the conversations that we've been having, there hasn't been some reference to the possibilities that might emerge from that sort of technology.
I'm conscious of the time, so actually maybe, yeah, okay, we just, I think you were just, we'll take those two questions together and then each of the panel will sum up, if that's okay. Sorry, so behind you, did you have your hand up? Yeah.
Thanks, Lorna. Well done for putting the meeting together to Engineers Ireland. And I echoed the lady at the front there who said that she'd like the discussion to be about the forward thinking rather than all that. I was involved in the construction of the Quincentennial Bridge in 1984, like, so, you know, we've heard all the past stuff, and I followed Catherine Connolly's battles with the Seamus Quirk Road and all that stuff. We've had all that, like, let's go forward. This man here is talking about the future as well. I'm very disappointed that only one speaker has mentioned climate change. And that is a very significant effect in Galway, because I think we've all very recently seen that without looking at climate change, there isn't really going to be an awful lot of city centre left. That's a factor. The other thing I think is that there's an awful lot of focus on Galway City as it stands, and I would suggest that the Galway City boundaries are an anachronism. They don't include Ardon, they don't include a lot of Parkmore, they don't include where I live, which is Ordenmore. I'm a proud resident of Ordenmore Mary, and it's the 4th biggest town in County Galway. It's very, very viable. I cycle from Ordenmore to Galway every day, at the risk of my life. And then I think it was the Professor O'Donoghue who said that I know what you meant by saying that you wanted to make it easier and nicer for people to cycle. And Shane Foran spoke about having cyclopaths that didn't have glass on them. But for me, the issue on cycling, and all the people that ask me about cycling, the issue is safety. Catherine mentioned that, like, we're scared of our wits. Now, there are 3 roads from Ardmore to Galway. That's 5 lanes as in your thing. There's a motorway, a dual carriageway, and the old coast road. Yet there's still an 80-mile-an-hour speed limit on much of the coast road. In fairness to the authorities in Ardmore, the speed limit in Ardmore goes out past the new railway station. But the speed limit in Galway, it goes up to 80 or 100 at Galway Crystal. And then it's incomprehensible what happens between there and Duishka. And I'm cycling that road. There's a lot of talk lately, and no one has mentioned this, is the minimum passing distance legislation, which is essential for safety of cyclists, but that's tied to speed limits as well. So I think that there are things that need to be looked at. I think it's safety for cyclists is the issue. The Road Safety Authority have figures on this, you can look them up, that fatalities of cyclists are way higher than fatalities of other road users. They are vulnerable road users. If you're going to improve the thing, and I think that the point about the city is, I think the statistics are there as well, that an awful lot of the people who work in the city are from the hinterland. Whether you like single one-off houses or not, like, that's the reality. The population of Galway is probably closer to 150,000 if you count those people that are coming in from Ardmore and from Tuam and from Mycullen, like that man was speaking about there. And they all have to be catered for as well, you know? So I think that looking at it just as a city, as a resident of Ardmore, I feel disenfranchised. I do not have a vote in the city council. So thank you for your time.
Okay. This gentleman here.
My name is Gabriel Castro. I'm an engineer, member of Engineers Ireland West. I've been cycling for over 30 years across Galway. I'm still alive.
Good for you.
I think we do need a bit of ambidextrous thinking here. We do need a long-term planning and vision, but we need to do something in the short term. So can I just challenge make two challenges in relation to that? In the bus, I think we've only got choice of bus and cycle in the short term. Moving people from Brian particularly, we have a lot of people that move from east to west. Why is there no bus going across Pennsylvania Bridge? And that's just one to get people from east to west. It seems very obvious. The second thing is, and maybe Catherine, I'd like to address this to you. I have 200 metres of a bicycle lane, which is under the railway bridge. And somebody had the will to actually, there's plenty of room in Lochatalia. There's room in the back of the Huntsman, and we can use the type of thinking that we have in Blackrock, where you can have duty of care, where you can share bicycles with people walking. They do it in San Francisco. You can map a cycle corridor as well across the city with a bit of will. And it shows there's 200 beautiful metres under, because somebody invested some money in it. And the third thing, we don't have a minister, Catherine, but I think there's things like that we could do directly. And the one thing in relation to that, if someone digs up a road and puts in a new gully, that it makes it, bicyclists can't fall into it, that there's a standard in there of basic road repairs. That's just 2 points.
Okay, thank you very much. So each of the speakers has 5 minutes to sum up and respond to some of the points made. So Brian, if you want to.
Okay, I'll just answer that question about Quincentennial Bridge there, because it's one that has come up every time I'm out speaking in that. I suppose, without making excuses, there are a finite level of resources available to us in terms of the level of fleet we have and that. And all the research has shown over the years that the big trip attractors in Galway are in and out of the city centre. And as such, the network has been built in such a way that interchange can take place at that point to allow you to travel effectively from anywhere in the city to anywhere in the city. Making your interchange in Eyre Square. To try and have a service from Knocknacarra, we'll say, to Parkmore direct, how do you make the decision then in terms of, should you also have one from Salt Hill? Should you also have one from Rahoon? direct to Duishka, and then you're quickly flitting away the resource levels that are there. So the most efficient manner in which you can work the network at the moment with the level of resources we have is to interchange in Eyre Square. Quincentennial Bridge, I suppose, over the years, again, you've no housing, so to speak. Once you're crossing the bridge, you don't have the passengers to pick up at that point. I know there's an argument for getting people from the west side of the city where they live to maybe places where they work on the east side, but again, it comes down to that level of resources. If you dedicate a vehicle to that particular route, you have to take it out somewhere else, given what we have at the moment. In addition to that, there is no priority on Quincentennial Bridge, and we know how jammed up that can get, and you're going to run into the difficulties that will bring with transport. So I suppose the longer term solution, as developed by ARPS and that, has allowed for a lot more east-west or west-east travel to cater for that anomaly that's there in terms of people living on the west side and working on the east. We had a similar situation with schools, people travelling from the east side of the city with all the secondary schools on the west side. We did get around that in some way with some additional resources available to us at peak times for school transport and that, and it has. But in the main, any kids travelling from the east side of the city to the schools are interchanging at Eyre Square, and that's working effectively, particularly now with Leap cards and that, which offers integrated ticketing, etc. There's no need for to be paying two fares or anything like that. So as it stands at the moment, just to answer your question on Quincentennial Bridge, at the moment it's a matter of the level of resources that are available to us and using them in the best possible manner.
Shane?
What's the man from Oranmore? What's your name, sir? Hiya, Seamus and Gabriel. Before I get to Seamus and Gabriel, just a comment on the bus lanes on the Seamus Quirk Road, which is the bus lanes on the Seamus Quirk Road were imposed by the elected council, you remember, against the wishes of the city roads engineers and roads department, okay, who insisted at the time that we could not have bus lanes on the Seamus Quirk Road unless we had the outer bypass first. Are people spotting a theme here? Okay, which is, and this is, I apologise for not coming forward with a vision, but the problem with vision in Galway is you're not allowed to have a vision until the outer bypass is built. Okay? We can't even have cycle parking outside here, right? There isn't 200 cycle parking spaces in the city for 20,000 third level students, but we have to have an outer bypass first. Okay? So there's a recurring theme here with city management. Not the councillors, with city management, and people need to kind of wake up and smell the coffee, for want of a better word. Dan, can you put your hand up for Seamus and Gabriel? Sorry? Put your hand up for Seamus and Gabriel. Put your hand up in the air. Right, Dan is working on a plan for a cycling route into the city from Oranmore through Ross Hill. Talk to him afterwards.
What?
It's
in the development plan. There's a greenway.
Yeah, but this sums it up, right? The greenway is going through people's back gardens, Derek.
No,
it is. It will not happen. It won't happen. I'm on the committee. Please, Derek. All right, I'm on the committee. I know where the greenway is going. On Lochatalia, I don't know if you've noticed recently, they put in a bike share stand at the back of the Huntsman. And along with the bike share stand, they've put up signs forbidding cycling on the footpath into town. Okay? And that kind of sums up what happens in Galway. There's no reason why that path couldn't be made wider and used as a cycling facility into town, but it seems like any time there's an opportunity to do something for cycling, they have to do the opposite. I'm not in a position to explain why, but it's a consistent and recurring theme. And I think I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Shane. Catherine? Thanks very much. First of all, my apologies. I think to Colin, yes, I should have mentioned it. It was somewhere in my notes in relation to it. I'm not an expert on it, but it should have been mentioned because it is part of the future. In relation to vision, I make no apology. I live by a vision. It's what keeps me in politics. Okay. I have suffered as a result. I've lost votes. I make no excuses for it. That's who I am. That's what I stand for. I fundamentally believe that more roads are wrong. They haven't worked. We're not learning. So there is a fundamental disagreement here. I had forgotten what Shane said in relation to the Seamus Court Road. And somebody said we didn't come to hear about the past. I started with the future. I started with the vision for the future. But to understand that vision, you have to understand where we came from. And when you ask more and more, it's not possible. I cannot do any more. I sat through an oral hearing in relation to the 4 roundabouts. It was really, it's the subject of a small movie really as to what they were telling us was the right approach. I think the cycle lanes are appalling. I wouldn't use a cycle lane. All of the dirt goes into the cycle lane, you get punctures. You must make the roads safe for all users. That is the key. How do you do that? You reduce speed, you share the space. This is something you've often said in the past. That is the major way of doing it. The outer bypass road, it is such a boring topic at this point. I have no control of it. The Taoiseach of our country has said we need the outer bypass. Micheál Martin has said we need the outer bypass. You're saying we need the outer bypass. I have no control over that. It's taken its place. The problem is we won't see it for the next 8 years in any event. What are we now, 18? So regardless of my view, we're still, what are the solutions for the next few years? What are engineers going to help? What are they suggesting as the solutions? That's what I would love to see. In relation to the cost, 1 billion is an obscenity. It's absolutely an obscenity to talk about a 60-kilometre route that will put more cars on the road at over 30 million a kilometre. If any of you can stand over that, honestly, I'm lost somewhere. 30 million per kilometre. Over 40 houses being knocked. But I didn't come here about the N6 or what was the outer bypass. My point in mentioning it is because it's the only route, excuse the bad pun, we're not looking at the other solutions. And that's the problem, and I've watched it since 1999. In relation to a bicycle route, yes, it's in the development plan. The plan is wonderful. All the plans are wonderful. Well, relative. I don't want to be held to that. It's the implementation of those plans. So if you've the Taoiseach coming to Galway saying this N6 has to be done, knowing well it can't be done, with the best will in the world, it has to go through the planning process. Chances are it might end up in Europe. What are the immediate term solutions? What can we do to help us, Éireann? What resources do they need to increase their buses? How do we connect Connemara with Galway with a proper bus? Nobody can get in from Carna to Galway. One bus a day. One bus a day. Somebody living in Carna can't get to Clifton. The N84 is having a public meeting Monday week. Why? Because the road is in such an appalling condition from Headford. There's no money for it, but we have $1 billion for a 16-kilometre route that will put more cars on the road. Boher, Durart and Carrow is caving in. There's no money for it. There's no money for the basic roads to keep people living in their own communities, and the services that should be in their own communities are being transferred into a city that's full of traffic congestion. And the plan that's here, the National Development Plan, is talking about 50% development within our city, which would feel it a light rail. I've no problem with a bus corridor. Absolutely, it's the right way forward. Have a dedicated bus corridor, and we can look at that for light rail. I'm no expert, but I am firmly of the opinion that public transport is the answer and not more roads. And we cannot wait for a road. I'm going to Dublin tomorrow. I'd be up there tonight only for this. I go up on a bus. Coming out on a Thursday night, it is jam-packed with traffic the whole way out, and we have the bus route, and it's brilliant. I wish it was Bus Éireann I was using, but the other bus is more frequent on every hour. I'd be a supporter of transport. Schools in Galway, we have over 30-something schools on my last count within a couple of kilometres. everyone putting cars on the road, including myself, because it wasn't safe for my 2 sons to cycle from Claddagh up to the roundabout in Bohermore, less than 2 miles, and I was putting a stupid Jeep on the road, adding to traffic congestion. Climate change, we are going to pay more than what we're going to pay for the N6 in fines in a few years' time. We have many more plans on climate change. We have committed obligations, and we're going to meet none of them if we keep going down the road of high carbon emissions. I could go on, but Park and Ride, 2005 we put it into the plan. That would have lifted the traffic off the streets of Galway, wouldn't it? Park and Ride out in Barnard Spittle, Park and Ride in Oranmore, My Cullen, none of it implemented, not one bit of it.
Thank you. I presume that 1 billion figure, we're talking about 650 million for the bypass.
At a conservative estimate, it's 650 million. Depending on who you're listening to, that figure goes between 600 million and 700 million. And that's not counting what was already spent on the consultants who deserve their money, and prior to that on the previous outer bypass, and the millions that were spent. If a fraction of it went to cycling facilities and went to a free bus service circling the city to lift the traffic on the road, it would be cheaper and more sustainable.
Thank you, Catherine. Padraic.
Okay. I suppose, how do you follow that? But I suppose I'm looking, and the title of tonight's session was about the future, and I certainly have been trying to talk about the future for this city, and I think there are huge opportunities here for us, but we have to grasp them. We cannot rely on old methods, old techniques. We have to, as a city, we have to totally change the way we think about developments, and that requires, as I said, it requires upping our game big time, whether it's light rail, outer bypass, etc. I've been involved, I suppose, loosely for maybe the last 6 or 7 years. I see my colleague Brendan Mulligan there now. We were involved on looking at what types of things could be done to improve traffic in Galway, and we looked at a fair few options. You're still only just rearranging the deck chairs in the Titanic in many respects, because I'm not convinced the space is there. And if we're going to grow by 50%, the space will even diminish even more. So I think we have to look at radical changes in how the city operates and how we ourselves operate. We will see more bike lanes. I am convinced of that. Money has to go into that. Money has to go into public transport, whatever form it is. That is an absolute given. But when, if we can reclaim our city streets, that will be what will really, I think, make it for us. And we have to do that. We have to then, ban cars from, from College Road, wherever, but, have more one-ways to allow traffic to move that bit freer. We can do those things, but we have to make radical decisions to get there. So that's my closing comment. Thank you very much.
Very lively debate, and thanks very much to Engineers Ireland West and to Mayo for organising this, and hopefully it will be the beginning of an ongoing discussion about the future of Galway.
Thanks very much. Take the microphone back. Thanks very much, and thanks to all the speakers, and thanks to Lorna for chairing. I think that was definitely a really good debate, and we probably could talk all evening about it. There's so many more, I suppose, aspects that we could go into. I suppose I've been planning this event now for the last while. I think it's really important to me, being from Galway. But as I said, I've lived away for many years, and coming back now, I see there's a huge opportunity for development and sustainable development in our city, and bringing, I suppose, bringing ideas from around the world. It was only last year that a guy at work said to me, in the past, we were actually talking about data centres and storing data is what we're talking about, and he was saying in the past engineers were worrying about in the horse and cart era, where are we going to get more horses, who's going to look after the horses, where are we going to store the carts, and they were, it was sort of a huge problem. And then next thing, the motor car came along, and that problem went away, and so now, like this gentleman at the front said, that's the next thing. Maybe cars aren't going to be our problem in the future. We need to think ahead. What does the future look like? So yeah, I'd just like to thank everyone for coming and making the event a success. Thank the speakers for travelling, for their contribution, and for their time. And hopefully that it's a debate that a lot of people, it's so important for everyone in the city and in the surrounds, and hopefully it's something that we can develop into the future. Just to let you know, if you do stick around till it's about it's 9:20 now, at 9:30 there'll be some finger food if you want to chat around for another little while and get a bit of food out of it. Thanks very much.